Hey, Michael.
Hey, Diane, it is good to see you again for our continuing conversations on AI.
You too. This one's going to be a fun one. Our most recent episode, we talked with Alpha School founder Mackenzie Price. Most people have heard of Alpha at this point. It's getting a ton of attention. And so, what we tried to do there was really move beyond kind of the talking points and the marketing to really dig into the model itself, including specifically how they're using AI, which is turning into a bit of our quest this season. And so this conversation today is a part of that exploration on who's building what I would call maybe AI native school models, if anyone, and what might they look like? What are they starting to look like? And it's a really fun conversation today because we get to have a chat with an old friend.
Yes, that is indeed correct, Diane. Today we're going to get to chat with none other than the John Danner. John, for those that don't know him, has had a decorated career in tech before turning to education as he co-founded and led NetGravity, the first ad server company, I believe. And after taking it public, selling it to DoubleClick, John went back to school and then became a teacher, and he taught in Nashville for a few years there. And then I think a lot of folks know him because he co-founded, of course, Rocket Ship Public Schools in 2006, which we, of course, talked about also in our last episode. But Rocket Ship was a buzzy school for a good while there, marked by its student outcomes, its use of technology, its expansion. And then after leaving Rocket Ship in 2013, John did a number of other things, including found an online math tutoring company, creating some very interesting education investment vehicles and more. But I want to skip ahead to his most recent venture, Flourish Schools, which is what we're going to hear about today. So, John, hopefully I did some justice to the bio, but welcome. It is always good to see you.
Thank you, Michael. Great to see both of you. Long
Yeah,
time.
this is going to be fun. This is going to be fun. So let's start with grounding our audience. My assumption is that a lot of folks knew Rocket Ship and what you did there. Far fewer know about the Flourish Schools model itself and what these schools actually look like. So maybe give us the basics. Like, what is Flourish Schools? How many of them are there today? How big are they? What's the grade levels? What does a day in a student's life look like at these schools? Paint the picture for us.
Yeah. Yeah. So we started Flourish about a year ago. We opened our first school last August in Nashville. One micro school so far. They're middle schools, so grades 6 through 8. I'm out in Phoenix today. We're opening a couple more schools in Phoenix next year, next August. Um, and I'd say the reason for doing it, Diane knows this well, like doing schools is quite difficult work. So I often prefer being on the software side where, life is good. But, schools are hard work and sometimes you have to do them. I think the big motivator in starting Flourish for me was that I had started a couple of AI companies. Project Read, probably the most notable, doing reading, which is in a lot of classrooms. And I just noticed that most schools are using AI in a very supplemental way right now, very much the same way they used ed tech. And that bothered me because, in reading, for example, I think there's a pretty good argument that AI for reading is going to be better than the best human reading teacher within the next year or two. It's not a long way off at all. Because teaching reading is really hard. Training teachers to teach that is hard. It's hard to be patient with kids when they're making lots of mistakes. And it's hard to remember everything a kid has ever done when they're reading with you, right? All of which just is default for AI. So, in watching Project Read roll out and seeing everybody kind of use it, in those last 15 minutes in a class when they were kind of, a kid was done with the assignment and needed to do something else. Like I was like, that doesn't seem like how AI should affect schools. It should be used more strategically. What can AI do? And therefore, what do you do with teacher time? I think, for me, teacher time has always been kind of the scarce resource. It's like whatever teachers focus on is really what schools do. No matter what schools talk about, it's like, okay, what are your teachers doing? That's what's going to have the most impact. And so at Flourish, we started with the assumption that what we call foundations, kind of the basic skills, reading, writing, math, um, are going to be better taught by AI. The way we kind of look at it is if you think of like tier one, tier two, tier three instruction, it's really the move from technology as a tier two or tier three
Mm.
product to a tier one. So, can you use AI to do kind of tier one basic skills and standards based instruction? And so that was what we did from day one at Flourish. We're 6 months into it now. I would say the lesson learned is, of course, you're going to have students in any school that, like, whatever, we have several special ed, several ELL students. They need more time and attention, but during our foundations block, which is an hour long, teachers have time to work with them one-on-one. And a teacher working with a student one-on-one on reading or whatever is like a luxury that like no other school has, because that you can't have them doing that. But when all the other kids are making great progress with AI, having a teacher spend that time, that luxurious time, is actually possible. So that's the fundamental thesis, is that we can do that in a way that that's what our teachers are not doing and spending all their time preparing for and teaching during the day. And that allows us to kind of come up with a new curriculum. And I think actually, you guys want to focus on AI, and we should. I think the actual interesting question with schools is, once you make the commitment that AI is going to do a lot of this basic instruction, then you're confronted with a now what problem, which is like, oh gosh, what's school for, like, moving forward? And I guess that's what we're kind of excited about, is we're in this super serious time of change for students. They're not going to grow up to a world that we all experienced. My daughter just got out of college. She was a pre-med but didn't really want to be a doctor. She gets out in the job market, and gosh, there are no jobs. And like all those other things that she learned along the way about hustle, and you got to go put yourself out there and whatever, played out, and she found a job. But boy, like, if you had just spent all your time in school like learning algebra or whatever, she wouldn't have done well, right?
Mhm.
So I think, our point of view at Flourish is we talk about three things mainly. Relationships, so these are middle schoolers, so like, how do you get along with other people? And we do an hour we call circles, which is really as kind of therapeutic as it might sound, where kids are sitting in a circle talking about their feelings, how other kids affect them, etc. And for many of our students, I'd say it's pretty mind blowing to actually understand how other people are thinking, as you're talking and saying things and stuff like that. And so really powerful. So relationships is a big piece. And then we talk about two others: superpowers and passions. So superpowers is kind of our word for what people have called soft skills. I hate the term soft skills because it's kind of denigrating in a world of like standards based instruction. Oh, that's the other stuff that makes you a human, but it's not nearly as important as high school chemistry or whatever. Like, we actually think it's the opposite. Now that knowledge is pretty abundant and accessible, like the things that make you human are the more important things. So,
Mm.
do you have agency and curiosity and these other things that make you awesome? That's important. And then the passion side is really, what do you want to do when you grow up? What are you excited about? What are your big interests? Which, as for upper income families, tends to happen at home. You're sitting around the table, or you go, on a little family field trip or whatever, and kids are discovering lots of different things that they might be excited about. Happens a lot less in working class and lower income families. We're purposefully mixed income. We took a page out of your book for that, Diane. I think that's really the right way to do this. And so for our kids who are, working class and lower income, we think like discovering what the world is and what you might want to be in is super important, especially in
Mhm.
middle, so that you kind of enter high school with some idea of like what you're excited about and some kind of path you might want to pursue.
Mhm.
Even if that changes, that's okay. You're not just kind of clueless showing up in high school, which a lot
Yeah.
of kids are.
Yeah. Super helpful, John. One of the ways I've been trying to have conversations with people about what these sort of AI native models will look like or can look like or do look like is I don't want to have a conversation where we compare what they're doing compared to like the old industrial model
Yeah,
classroom.
right,
That's
right.
like
Yeah,
not useful to
we've
me.
had that conversation. Yeah,
So I keep using sort of Rocket Chip and Summit because I know them the
yeah,
best of like best in class sort of personalized learning models that we were doing the very best we could at the
yeah,
time with the resources we had and
yeah,
doing a lot of what you just described,
yeah.
right? Like I'm assuming circles maybe comes out of Valor, which it has
It
an origin
does. It
in it,
does. Yeah,
so like a lot of that great stuff we were doing before. So what I'm really, and you've alluded to this, I think, with shifting tier one instruction out of like the classroom model and in the AIs doing that. But let's dig in a little bit deeper. Like literally what's possible today that we just
yeah,
didn't do 10 years ago and now we can do it. And what does that specifically look like in the
yeah.
model?
I think the big change here is really one from kind of point and click to conversational, right?
Okay.
Like that was the eye opener for me, really, back in the Chat GPT moment, was you kind of just immediately, it became clear that a conversational agent would be able to kind of work through things with a student in so much better way than kind of what we all did with kind of ed tech back in the day. So we called it personalization, but there's kind of a difference between a program more or less knowing where you are and what you need versus what an AI does, which is it knows everything. Like in Flourish, we more or less pour everything about a student into it. We have transcripts from everything students say. Like the AI just is all knowing about what's happened with that student at the school. And so when it's personalizing, it's 100 or 1,000 times deeper level than like this basic categorization that edtech used to be able to do. So I think it's much more aware of what students see. And I just think the mechanism of talking to a student conversationally is so much better than kind of navigating through a bunch of screens and the stuff we used to do.
So, I'm assuming then you're building your own, it sounds like you're building, you called it curriculum, but like
Yeah.
that tier one, because I have yet to see sort of off the shelf products that are really, that I would be like, yeah, they're great. They can
Yeah.
do the tier one
Yeah.
instruction. So talk about what you're building, what
Yeah.
that looks like for middle school kids, you know?
Yeah. Right. And remember, we're 6 months old. So anything I tell you
Yeah.
is like total work in progress. Um, but we've got good people and we're working pretty hard on it. So the fundamental idea. So I'll tell you where we started with this and then kind of where we are now.
Right.
We kind of had this idea that we'd have an agent on our side that was very good at um, sending kids to the right place to get the right help, right? So kind of like a hybrid between the old ed tech world and kind of this AI driven world. And we pretty quickly discovered the kind of things that we had discovered at Rocket Chip, or I'm sure you did at Summit, which is there's so much friction and stuff involved in manipulating another program. It's like basically
Yep.
not worth it.
Yep.
And so that probably took a couple months for us to just realize like this is a waste of time. And so really the way our system works today is a student, I'll tell you today and then where we hope to be in 2 months. So
Okay.
today, the way it works is that we have kind of a pre-assessment where we're looking for what a student knows. Based on what they know, they enter a conversation with our AI. We often will have a 1 or 2 minute video of like just what that thing is, kind of an old ed tech type thing, right? Just because I think a framing is often helpful for a new concept, but that the majority of the real instruction is kind of this dialogue between the AI and the student on like, okay, well, let's talk about, um, you know, two-digit addition, just for lack of anything better. Here's a problem. solve this problem for me, tell me how you're doing it, and then basically just digging in as the student doesn't get it. And it's so easy to prompt for. I mean, Zeal, my third company, the math tutoring company, we had figured out all the misconceptions that every student has in math. And so when you prompt an AI with that, okay, here are the 10 likely things that a student's going to do wrong when they're doing two-digit math, it just goes, oh, okay, that's it. And then it goes deep there, right? So if you
Right.
think about it, it's very fluid. It's very much what a human tutor would do in that case. They're kind of responding in real time to what that student's doing and going, oh geez, you don't really understand how to carry the tens place, so let's go deeper there
Yeah.
or whatever. So that um, interaction with the AI happens, and then we go out and post assess. And so the student's kind of manipulating where they want to go and what they want to do through that process. Where we're going, where I hope to be in a couple months, is that's all the pre and post assessment is kind of gone.
Yep.
We're finding that the AI through that dialogue has just as good an understanding of what that student is capable of doing as kind of any formal assessment
Mhm.
process. And it's much more natural to just have the students sit down with the AI, when they start, and talk about what they want to work on. And then, kind of the AI drills into that and shows them a video and does things like that. So I think it could feel quite a bit like a student showing up at a tutoring center, and that tutor kind of just working with them. It feels
Yep.
like that's going to work, but that's
Okay.
where we're with it.
Is that voice or are they typing or
We're,
both? Do they
we're
have
doing
a voice?
typing now. We'd love to do voice.
Okay.
We started there and we really worked hard on it. I would say that the biggest problem with voice for us is that we have never figured out the kind of noisy classroom problem. Um,
Mm.
Very
Yeah.
hopeful that somebody does, because the issue, even if you're off in a corner of a classroom or even outside in the hallway, um, the AI hears everything. And so you know, and if you think about it, like when you're in one of these sessions, the AI hears something and somehow inserts that in the conversation. That's just weird. It kind of like ruins the whole flow.
Yeah.
So it's easier with middle schoolers to do kind of a text-based one right now. But what I've told the team is I think the main interface for AI will probably be audio at some point. Like it's just the most natural way. And so as the industry kind of builds better and better models for that,
Mhm.
I hope that this problem gets solved and we can go to audio.
That makes sense to me. And do you then have a knowledge graph underneath that? So even though the student's sort of like flowing where it makes sense to them, at the end of the day, you have kind of the macro plan of where you want them to go. And
Yeah, so we built a super elaborate one for Zeal, and unfortunately, are more or less rebuilding it now
I'm
uh,
sure.
for all of our stuff. Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, as you guys know, that the real challenge with AI is often that it's so good in the moment at these things, but you kind of have to bring it back to kind of reality sometimes. And so, having a prompt that says, hey, pull the knowledge graph and see what's the most important thing to work on is helpful. It's kind of like
Yeah.
this like, savant type tutor that can like help a kid in the moment with anything, but kind of loses the picture of like
Mhm.
what's the most important thing to do. So you kind of have to bring it back. And I think the
Yeah.
knowledge graph is the way to do that.
John, how does this connect with? I know you're very committed to project-based learning and sort of that approach, which you know that I am as well. And it sounds a little bit like what you're describing. At Summit Learning, we had the playlist where you were doing the content knowledge. What you're describing, I think, is a stronger version of that and what AI can do. How are you connecting it to the projects? What's the intersection there? What's
Yeah.
going on there? And are you using AI in the projects?
Yeah. Um, the answer to the second is definitely yes. And let's talk about that in a second. So we have a theory as a school system that's probably the opposite, at least the opposite of like my alma mater. I've been talking to Bellarmine, it's my alma mater in San Jose, talking to teachers about that. And, AI is a problem for a lot of schools and teachers, right? Like it's the cheating and stuff like that. We have basically the opposite approach, which is like assume any kid can use anything that will help them read, write, understand, research better, and then like up level what you're teaching so that you assume that yes, everybody's writing is going to be perfect now. Don't worry about that. That's not your
Right.
job anymore. So with projects, you know, the link really is when you're in a project, you're trying to apply knowledge to
Yep.
build something, to do something. And it's extremely common to not understand something well enough to do that well. And so you need to go off and kind of research and understand it. So the link that will exist that doesn't exist yet, which I'd like to see, is Foundations lives in its own block right now at Flourish, but we'd like Foundations to be accessible kind of basically all the time for students so that that's the main way that you research as well through kind of
Yeah.
an AI interface. So that's the ideal. Right now, what happens is that a student kind of struggles, they go off and use Gemini or something for things, and then we know, the AI knows because it's paying attention to the project and what's going on. Oh, the student struggled with this. And then in Foundations, that kind of bubbles to the top the next day. But like, why wait? Like, just make it real time. If a student's
Yeah.
struggling with something, just go ahead and do it. We do have to figure out kind of the tier one versus tier two of this. Like, if a student's really struggling and they've got a real issue and you just wipe out project time doing that, that doesn't feel right either. So we're going to have to figure out like what level of intervention happens if they're still not getting it. But certainly at least the tier one, like, oh, I just don't know about this, let's learn more, should happen through that foundation system, we think.
That makes sense. Yeah, that makes sense to me. What Tell me about what the educator is doing in
Yeah.
these times.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the most important thing really is, and I know for many, many teachers, the concern is, gosh, well, maybe you just don't need me anymore or something. And that's
Right.
just completely not true. I mean, I noticed this at Rocket Ship. People go into teaching because they love kids. That's like, that's the common thing that you always hear. Some people go into teaching because they want to be content experts, but not that many. At least at kind of elementary and middle, like it's still like really driven by like I really want to connect with kids and be with kids, not like I want to be the best reading teacher or whatever. And so, when you kind of push a lot of this like content knowledge and instruction to AI, what really happens is a little bit of like what I was describing with tier two and tier three during that time, where a teacher now has a lot of time. So, a lot of the stuff is going on. Project based learning is nice that way. Kids are working on things, feels kind of like a big Montessori classroom or whatever, where like everybody's being industrious and getting things done. But like, you know, the question is always, okay, so like what's the best and highest use for the teacher at that point? So, I think, our opinion in general is kind of building trusted relationships is the most important thing you can do as a teacher, right? Like anytime you think about like teachers that affected you, it's because for whatever reason they spent the extra time to kind of get to know you, understand what you were going through, and like became kind of a trusted friend and advisor. And I think buying time back to allow teachers to do more of that is by far the highest value. Of course, interventions and things like that are awesome. Having students reach to do higher order thinking once they've finished a project, all that's great. But I think it's all in kind of service of making that connection between a teacher and a student such that the student is more excited and interested to, learn and think with that teacher about other things, especially with superpowers and passions and things like that. Like we have it, I'll just brief aside, we have these report cards that have superpowers on them. And so they say things like, organization or self awareness or whatever. So you can imagine our parent teacher conferences are pretty amazing because while a parent is like, yeah, I don't really know much about like middle school math and frankly don't care that much. Boy, when you bring up like self awareness or something like that, they can go on for a long time. And so you have these really deep discussions about these kind of things. And kids by middle school, certainly in high school, they're not really listening to their parents about these things very much. They're kind of sick of hearing this. So I really do think schools have a way better chance of kind of influencing how children are doing these things, especially around superpowers and passions. But that requires trust, and trust, it's hard to build. So we think that's the best thing for teachers to be doing is kind of like getting into deeper conversations with students and talking to them about like, what their interests are, what they like, and building that in the hope that they have influence over that student's trajectory.
Well, so John, I think this actually is perfect translation into the other thing that AI is doing to free up teacher time
Yeah.
for that, which is, as I understand it, at least from what you've written, is that you have this AI coach that is quite involved in the project-based learning piece of this equation in
So,
I think two distinct ways. So maybe talk about that.
yeah, I mean, again, work in progress. So I'm not super happy with how it's being involved right now, but I'll tell you what I want it to be doing well. So I think that, and Diane, you live this, that the real challenge with project-based learning is there's kind of like this huge amount of really mechanical stuff that happens in project-based learning where a student's like confused about what they're doing or they're like tired and not motivated or whatever. And you watch project-based classrooms and like actually like 80% of the teacher time is like walking around doing that stuff where they're like, come on, Joey, let's get going, blah, blah, blah. Which of course there will still be some of that, but like to what extent can you create a really awesome thought partner that kind of does a lot of those things like, hey, Joey, what we need to focus on here is this. Have you thought about like, kind of re-engaging the way a good teacher does? Because if you can free them of a bunch of that kind of, really mechanical time, I think not only does it free time, it also like kind of frees your mind up as a teacher to kind of think deeper and like look for relationships and these kind of things that we really want teachers to do. So I think that's a big piece of what we're hoping that this coach does. The other thing it really does for us, and you asked about this before as well, Diane, is it listens. So we've got mics all over the place, students are talking, it's all anonymized, but basically the system knows what bucket to throw all the comments that students are making, et cetera. And when you think about like superpowers, these soft skills, one of the other difficult things in that kind of curriculum and approach is like, and you see it in kind of SEL type schools all the time, it's like kind of devolves into like playtime sometimes where it's not as rigorous. And
Mm-hmm.
what AI can really do there is by looking for evidence of perseverance, for example, like when did this student like show that like they didn't just stop, they kind of asked the next question and kept
Yeah.
going. Like when the AI can provide those examples in each student's kind of superpowers report card of those things, and the teacher can review it, that is so helpful because you know when it comes to like pushing for students to improve in these areas, teachers really have to know like kind of where is everybody, where is John on these different skills, where should I focus, and so helping to provide data so that teachers can do that is really really important. I would say it's pretty good. Like here's one thing that kind of surprised me. Uh, the we did this like a month and a half ago. The AI assessing these, we have 24 of these superpowers across all the students in the school. We did the AI rated students on a
Hmm.
scale of 1 to 5, and then 3 teachers rated those same students. And it was only off from kind of the lead teacher by about 10%. So, like, you know, that to me, that's like noise. Like, it's close enough. It's kind of like radiology stuff where it's like, you're probably right. Like, a super expert teacher can absolutely do a little bit better, but like, we kind of want to get it to the point where the teacher's like, yeah, I pretty much
Yeah.
trust this. I'll look at the evidence, but more or less it says that. Okay, like, what should I do
Yeah.
about that?
And John, that assessment from the AI was just sort of that natural capture of all they're doing and assessing based on, yeah, to me, like the assessment is a no-brainer. That
Yeah.
should, I think it's a conflict of interest for teachers to be assessing, quite frankly,
Yeah.
but that's another conversation. But
I mean, the
that's,
other point here, right, is that when you do assessment that way, I think it's both more valid and stops taking classroom time. Right? It just
yes.
Hmm.
Yeah.
happens naturally, and that's how it
Li-
happens in the real world too. It's not like you sit down and you go,
Right.
"Oh,
We,
this,"
we don't stop and say, no, here's your time
right?
to
You don't
review
give
your,
somebody a
yeah.
5 question assessment or something. It's
Yeah.
crazy.
Yeah.
So
So can I just play back to you what I think you're just saying, just to make sure I'm getting a real picture of what's happening or what you are moving towards happening? And you've only been at the 6 months, but you're making pretty quick progress, it sounds like. So this, like, if I'm a student in my project time, and we all know this happens a lot, there's some kids who, like, literally, the teacher's bumblebeeing around, and every time the teacher bumblebees around, maybe I'm productive for that moment, but
yeah,
then the teacher bumblebees away, and then I'm kind of playing or I'm
yeah,
whatever. But AI knows what I'm doing in those in between times, and so
yeah,
I'm getting some sort of feed or feedback of some sort, and the teacher's seeing it, my family's maybe seeing it, of like,
yeah,
hey, this is what's going on in your time, and so we're going to hold the mirror up, give you some feedback, tell you, like, this is the stuff you could be doing to be more productive.
yeah,
Is that kind of what you're
yeah,
describing? And if
yeah. And I think
so,
we're all going to have that. So this
yeah.
is another thing. Like, one of the things we think about a lot at Flourish is like, is this different than the real world's going to be, or
Hmm.
the same? And I think we all basically need that. Like, if you had a voice that was kind of going like, John, what are you doing? You've been doom scrolling. Like, like, it'd be pretty helpful, really.
Well, one
It's
of the big
interesting of an AI
conversations,
becoming pro-social there. Yeah. Sorry. Keep going,
yeah, well,
Diane.
one of the big conversations is about motivation, right? And like, oh, you have to like motivate kids to use the technology to learn. But actually, I think you're flipping the script here and saying, like, no, the technology is like literally helping young people be motivated because someone's paying attention and they're noticing what they're doing and they're giving them feedback on it. And,
The
um,
feedback thing is the important thing. It's like, basically, if something's giving you feedback, like, even if the feedback's not perfect, it's so much better than not getting feedback. Like the classroom where everybody's got their hand up and they're just waiting for the teacher
yeah,
to help. Like, that's a bad place to be. So now you've basically got this continuous loop. The other thing I would say that I think is just almost for free in this world is, the gaming world has figured out a lot of things that they do when you're doing a pretty basic task to play the game, and you might not be that excited about it, but like, they're setting up rewards. We use badges. So like, an example is, you might do 2 or 3 different projects, and by doing those 2 or 3 different projects, those build up to a badge, and so the badge is kind of hanging out there, and some other student in the class got it, and so you want it, and things like that. And those, like, really kind of basic game things are very helpful at different times during the day, right? Like, we
right,
kind of all need a little bit of push. We're very conscious of intrinsic versus extrinsic motivation. And so, like, projects are a good example where the default is extrinsic, and the default is intrinsic. We want students to be kind of working on that project because they're interested in that, because they want to do it. But there are definitely times where the AI paying attention and kind of prompting, and even, doing some rewarding and things like that, is actually quite helpful, for
yeah.
them to kind of persevere.
Um, John, I want to talk to you about, I think you're the perfect person to talk to about this. So, one of the things I hear out there a lot is like, oh, the hyperscalers are just going to build this. Like,
Yeah.
number one. Number two, most schools and school systems have zero ability to actually build what you're building. So,
Yeah.
you're sort of this unique person because you sit at the intersection of like opening, operating schools and the ability to build sophisticated technology. Is that, are the hyperscalers going to build what you're building? Like, are you, like, how do you think about the building of the technology here for schools?
Yeah. I mean, we'd be pretty happy if the hyperscalers built it, first of all. I, so I think that the main challenge over the next 20 years in education is going to be how quickly do we move to a world where students are living in the current world as opposed to 20 years ago
Yes.
or whatever, like, and so these basic things we're doing like foundations, I think it's important for students to live in that world now. And so what does it take school systems to move towards that world? I know that your approach at Summit, our approach at Rocket Chip in the kind of the beginnings of the ed tech world were, hey, let's just build these kind of basic model schools, and hopefully people will come visit and go, oh gosh, that doesn't look too bad, like I could probably do that as well. So I think a lot of the point of Flourish is creating this proof point where people can come and see and go, huh, that actually works well. And it definitely not dehumanizing. I see the teacher interactions with the students as being more human
Hmm.
than my classroom. So I think that's like actually our point, our reason for being is to kind of be that model. And we'll build a network and we'll get as big as we can, but really kind of purposefully influencing school leaders, district leaders, state leaders to think about, like, what they could do as well. On the technology side, I'm generally of the opinion that a lot of this will get easier and easier for everybody who's not at the foundation level over time. I will say, like, there are some exceptions to that. So, like with Project Read with phonemes and graphemes, when you're doing like kind of deeper reading stuff, they may get there. I mean, the AIs may know everything at some point, but like there's not a super strong reason for them to get there earlier.
Mhm.
So there are pockets like that that probably will be specialized for longer. But as a school, like it's just better for us the faster all of that becomes a commodity,
Yeah.
and the more we can just get off the shelf stuff. Like there's no real joy in building all of this stuff, and for the change to happen, we don't want people to have to think about all this stuff, really.
No. I have to ask about scale because your point that the faster we can get kids to be living in today's world versus the old world suggests that we need to scale as quickly as possible for
Yeah.
that to happen, to get as many kids there. You and I both bear a lot of scars around different efforts to
Yeah.
scale both mortar schools and
Yeah.
influence type things. This time you've gone with like a micro school
Yeah.
network. What's your, you had grand ambitions with Rocket Chip, and clearly, Rocket Chip's great and Preston's done an amazing job since you left, but it never reached sort of the scale that I think you
Yeah.
originally hoped.
Yeah.
What is your thinking now? Why micro schools?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, putting it like just putting it bluntly, I think politics killed charter schools, more or less. Like, you look at most high performing charter schools, they tend to look more and more like the districts that host them. They actually, like, I look at rocket ships around the country, they actually look like as much like the district they're hosted by as they look like rocket ships sometimes.
Mhm.
It's like, because your authorizer authorizes you and they have a lot of influence. So it was kind of like this cool experiment that at the beginning probably created a lot of innovation, and then over time kind of has this, like, bringing it back to the kind of what the districts are doing. I think that micro schools, certainly micro schools, are starting in a very different place, where the way I think about charters is the compromise happened right at the beginning, where we would like to receive public funding, and for that we will like fit into the system. Whereas the micro school movement kind of started with a different point, where the stronger position was taken early on when the laws were formed, that like these things are independent. They're way more like private schools than they are like district schools. And of course, there will be some influence from states and others on that, but nowhere near like, what we saw in the charter world, where it was like, I remember the story I always tell is Rocket Ship had specialized teachers for math and reading in elementary school, which was not normal at all. And I was just tortured for years by districts over this. The main thing was like, no, a student needs one trusted adult, when they're that age. And if they have two, it's going to like, all fall apart, which was of course total bogusness. But I had to go through that anyway. Like, that
Yeah.
was just time of my life spent arguing something silly. Whereas with micro schools, you just don't have to argue that. So I think the big question is, what will be the ultimate like kind of political destiny of micro schools? Will they get capped in the way that charters did? Will they somehow kind of get influenced in a way they aren't now? Right now, they're pretty great. I mean, you basically build a school that parents and students love, and you build the curriculum and the program you want. That's nice.
That
Something
is
you
nice.
would have enjoyed, Diane.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's tempting. I will say Michael's always so kind, because when we start talking schools, I just take over. So he's being so patient. But the thing that's coming to me, and maybe this will lead us to wrap up, is, you and I both taught, and we're
Yeah,
passionate about teaching. And as you start talking about politics, one of the sort of sad elements of that politics to me is, I think teachers get involved in kind of, or, blocking some of these changes, a lot out of fear, a lot of it out of like, but
yep,
my identity is teaching a classroom of students and writing great curriculum and like doing all, being a hero. And I think what you're offering is a new identity for a teacher that might actually be more aligned with why they got into it in the beginning, which is, instead of judging myself by the quality of my classroom instruction, I'm like literally focused on every single kid learning and growing and in your words, flourishing,
yeah,
right? Which
totally.
is such a
Yeah,
profound mission.
in general, I think that professions that go in the direction of being more human, where the human elements are like the differentiator, they're going to do so much better.
Mm,
So I wrote a piece on this. I just think, while most parents would not have counseled their kids to become teachers in the last 20 years, I think that conversation is likely to change, because I think it's going to be both a more enjoyable job and probably more resilient to kind of the whole AI apocalypse than most jobs.
agreed. Yeah.
Mhm.
I think that is a good place to part us. But John, I feel like we have like 10 other questions like sitting in our doc that we could have dug in with you. This season of Class Disrupted is sponsored by Learner Studio, a nonprofit motivated by one question: what will young people need to be inspired and prepared to flourish in the age of AI, as individuals, in careers, and for civil thriving? Learner Studio is sponsoring this season on AI in education because in this critical moment, we need more than just hype. We need authentic conversations asking the right questions from a place of real curiosity and learning. You can learn more about Learner Studio's mission and the innovators who inspire them at www.learnerstudio.org. But let's pivot. This is fascinating. It's really cool to see what you're building and hear both the frustrations, but also, frankly, the North Star for where it's going. And one day, maybe Massachusetts will have you here. Yeah.
Massachusetts and
But
California so bad.
I'll pray for now. But let's pivot. We have this section that we always talk about things we're reading, watching, listening to. We try to do outside of work. people track us on this stuff. Diane and I occasionally fail. I'm going to fail today, so you can go wherever you want. So,
yeah. I'm rereading the Culture series, Ian Banks, right now. So my brother works for Tesla, and Tesla just, as you probably heard, kind of made this transition where they knocked off the Model S and Model X and are building robots. So he's building robots right now. So that makes it much more personal to me that like the future is coming soon. And so, I've always been a science fiction reader, but I think one of the cheat codes in Silicon Valley is like the amount of science fiction consumed equals your ability to be comfortable with like what's coming. So yeah, Culture Banks.
good rec. Diane, what's on your list? You said you're cheating, so
I'm cheating.
where
I'm
are you
failing today. Sorry. Ted Dintersmith has his latest book out and sent it along. I couldn't resist. The title is very provocative. It's called Aftermath, the life-changing math that schools won't teach you. And this is really for those who don't remember, Ted like goes hard on the things we're doing wrong and really tries to bring public awareness to them. And I think lots of us have been concerned about how math is taught and not taught and whatnot for a long time. So that's what this one's about.
I have an email from him in my inbox to send him my address. So I will do it after this conversation so he can send it to me as well. But I'm also cheating. I've been really interested in like, not just how schools start doing new things, but how do they stop doing old things? Like they just really bad. And it's not just schools, by the way, like all organizations are really bad at de-implementing or pruning like old things that don't make sense anymore, whether they're bad habits or frankly habits that just aren't fit for the current age. So I've started like trying to read some of the academic literature and just learn about that. And there's a book, Making Room for Impact, a de-implementation guide for educators by Aaron Hamilton, John Hattie, and Dylan William. And so I'm just cresting the end of that book right now and then looking at all the healthcare studies that they're citing. And I haven't decided if I'm going to read those, but that's where I am right now.
So is it a recommend, Michael, or no? Or
I mean, it's a deep workbook, right, on the topic, is what I would say. So like if you're a school and you're trying to work through this, definitely dive into it. I was more interested in intuitive, like who's thought about like, how do you de-implement? How do you prune? Right. And because there's just not a lot of conversation except for educators griping about it. And so I wanted to learn more. And it was a good starting point. So huge thanks, John, again for joining us. We appreciate it. Really check out his Substack as well if you want to just sort of follow along on the journey, I guess is what I would say. And we'll watch as Flourish opens 2 more in Arizona in August and keep up the good work. We appreciate you. And for all of our listeners, keep the emails, notes coming. We love it. We learn a lot from it as well, and it inspires us on our future topics. And so as always, thanks for joining us on Class Disrupted. We'll see you next time.